Elena pressed her back against the bathroom door, her heart hammering so loud she was sure he could hear it through the walls. The pregnancy test in her shaking hands showed 2 pink lines, but that wasn't what had her world spinning out of control. It was the phone conversation she'd just overheard, the one where her husband of exactly 1 year had told someone on the other end, "The contract ends tomorrow. Then I can finally claim what's mine." She slid down the door until she was sitting on the cold marble floor, still clutching the test. Claim what's his? After 365 days of separate bedrooms, polite good mornings, and carefully avoided touches, Adrian Cross was talking about claiming her like she was some kind of prize he'd been waiting to collect. The worst part was the flutter of hope in her chest, the treacherous part of her heart that had been waiting for this moment since she'd signed that marriage contract. But another voice in her head whispered darker thoughts. What if he only wanted her now because their business arrangement was ending? What if this was just another transaction to him? Elena wiped her eyes and stood up, looking at herself in the mirror. Her reflection showed a woman who had learned to hide her feelings behind careful smiles and designer clothes that Adrian's assistant picked out for her. Beautiful, successful looking but empty inside. She was an artist who hadn't painted anything meaningful in months because she spent all her time playing the perfect wife for cameras and business dinners. The bathroom door felt like a barrier between 2 worlds. On one side was Elena Martinez, the struggling artist who had married a stranger to save her family's failing business. On the other side was Mrs. Adrian Cross, who lived in a penthouse apartment where she and her husband moved around each other like polite strangers sharing an expensive hotel room. She thought about the pregnancy test again. How could she be pregnant when they'd never even kissed? The answer made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. 3 weeks ago she'd been sick with flu, and Adrian had taken care of her with surprising gentleness. She'd been delirious with fever, and in her confused state she thought he was someone else. Someone who loved her. They'd spent one night together, and she'd woken up alone with only a vague memory that she'd convinced herself was a fever dream. But the test in her hands proved it had been real. Elena heard footsteps in the bedroom and quickly hid the test in her makeup bag. She couldn't deal with this right now, not when everything was about to change tomorrow. The marriage contract that had governed their lives for a year would be void, and she still didn't understand what that meant for them. She opened the bathroom door to find Adrian standing by the window, still dressed in his dark business suit even though it was past 10 at night. He looked like he always did, impossibly handsome, perfectly put together, and completely untouchable. His black hair was styled just so, his jaw clean-shaven, his broad shoulders filling out the expensive fabric of his jacket. But tonight something was different about him. There was tension in the way he held himself, like he was fighting some internal battle. When he turned to look at her, his dark eyes held an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Elena," he said, and her name sounded different in his voice. Not the polite, distant tone he usually used, but something warmer. "Hungrier." "I was just getting ready for bed," she said quickly, moving toward her side of the room. They'd turned the master bedroom into a careful arrangement where they each had their own space, their own side, their own routine. It was like being roommates who happened to share a bed but never touched. "Wait," Adrian said, and something in his voice made her stop. "We need to talk." Elena's heart started racing again. This was it. This was when he would tell her about claiming what was his, about whatever came next now that their year was almost up. She turned to face him, trying to keep her expression neutral even though her hands were shaking. "Tomorrow is our anniversary," Adrian said slowly, like he was choosing each word carefully. "1 year since we signed the contract." "I know," Elena whispered. He took a step closer, and she noticed how his hands were clenched at his sides, like he was forcing himself not to reach for her. "Things are going to change between us." Elena felt like she couldn't breathe. What kind of changes? Adrian's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "The kind where I stop pretending I don't want you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Elena stared at him, wondering if she'd heard him correctly. After a year of careful distance, of treating her like she was made of glass, he was standing there telling her he wanted her? "I don't understand," she said. "You will," Adrian said, his voice rough. "Tomorrow, when the contract ends, you'll understand everything." He started to move toward her, and Elena took an instinctive step back. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she was afraid of herself. Afraid of how much she wanted him to close the distance between them, to finally touch her the way she'd been dreaming about for months. "Adrian," she said, but he held up a hand. "Not tonight," he said. "Tomorrow. When I can do this right." Elena wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to demand explanations for the year of loneliness and confusion. But something in his expression stopped her. There was pain there, and longing, and something that looked almost like fear. Instead, she nodded and went to her side of the bed, slipping under the covers while he disappeared into his walk-in closet to change. They'd perfected this routine over the past year, careful choreography that kept them from seeing too much of each other, from accidentally touching, from crossing any of the invisible lines that their contract had drawn around their marriage. But as Elena lay in the dark listening to Adrian moving around the room, she knew that everything was about to change. The question was whether she was ready for it, and whether the man who had been a stranger to her for a year was really ready to become something more. She thought about the pregnancy test hidden in her makeup bag, about the phone call she'd overheard, about the way Adrian had looked at her like he was starving and she was the only thing that could satisfy his hunger. Tomorrow she would have answers. Tomorrow she would find out what it meant to be claimed by Adrian Cross. But tonight, she was still just Elena Martinez, alone in a bed next to a man who felt like a beautiful stranger, carrying a secret that would change everything. 12 months earlier, Elena had been standing in a completely different bedroom, packing her few belongings into cardboard boxes while her world fell apart around her. The foreclosure notice was taped to her apartment door, her art gallery was closing, and her father's medical bills had drained every penny she'd managed to save. That's when Adrian Cross had walked into her life like some kind of avenging angel in an expensive suit. Elena remembered the first time she'd seen him at the coffee shop where she'd been working double shifts to make ends meet. He'd ordered a black coffee and sat in the corner booth, talking quietly on his phone about acquisitions and market shares. She'd noticed him because men like him didn't usually come to places like Tony's Coffee Corner, places where the furniture was old and the coffee was cheap. But he'd kept coming back, always ordering the same thing, always sitting in the same booth. Elena had started looking forward to seeing him, even though they'd never spoken beyond her taking his order. There was something about him that drew her attention. The way he carried himself, the intense focus in his dark eyes, the sense that he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Then one day, instead of ordering coffee, he'd asked her to sit down. "I have a proposition for you," he'd said, his voice as smooth and controlled as everything else about him. Elena had laughed, thinking he was joking. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that could solve all your financial problems," Adrian had said, and suddenly she'd realized he wasn't smiling. That's how she'd learned that Adrian Cross wasn't just some businessman who liked cheap coffee. He was the CEO of Cross Industries, one of the biggest companies in the city. He was worth more money than she could imagine, and somehow he knew everything about her desperate situation. "I need a wife," he'd said simply. "You need money. We can help each other." Elena had stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You want me to marry you? We don't even know each other." "That's exactly why it would work," Adrian had said. "No emotions, no complications. Just a business arrangement that benefits us both." He'd explained it to her over the next hour, laying out the terms like he was negotiating any other contract. His company was in the middle of a hostile takeover attempt, and his board of directors thought he was too young and reckless to handle it. Being married would make him look more stable, more mature. It would help him secure the support he needed to keep control of the company his father had built. In return, he would pay off all her debts, set up a trust fund for her father's medical care, and give her enough money to restart her art career. All she had to do was play the role of his loving wife for 1 year. There would be rules, Adrian had said, sliding a thick contract across the table. Separate bedrooms. No physical intimacy. We would appear together at public events, but our private lives would remain separate. Elena had read through the contract that night, trying to understand how her life had led to this moment. The terms were generous but clear. 1 year of marriage, with specific clauses about public appearances, social obligations, and maintaining the appearance of a happy couple. There were financial penalties for both of them if they broke the agreement early, and a clause about the marriage ending automatically after 12 months unless both parties agreed to extend it. But there was one section that had confused her, written in legal language she didn't fully understand. Something about consummation rights and marital claims that her lawyer had glossed over, saying it was standard language in marriage contracts. Now, lying in bed next to Adrian a year later, Elena realized she should have paid more attention to those clauses. The wedding had been small but elegant, held in Adrian's penthouse with just a few witnesses. Elena had worn a simple white dress that Adrian's assistant had picked out for her, and Adrian had looked devastatingly handsome in his black suit. They'd exchanged vows that they'd both written to sound loving and personal, even though they were really just reciting lines in an elaborate performance. When the judge had pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian had kissed her cheek instead of her lips. It was the only time he'd touched her that day, and Elena had tried not to think about how much she'd wanted that kiss to be real. The first few months of their marriage had been awkward but manageable. They'd established routines that kept them from spending too much time alone together. Adrian worked long hours at his office, and Elena had thrown herself into rebuilding her art career with the financial freedom he'd given her. They'd attended charity galas and business dinners together, playing the part of the devoted couple. Adrian was always attentive in public, holding her hand, putting his arm around her waist, looking at her like she was the most important person in the room. But the moment they were alone, he would retreat back into polite distance. Elena had told herself it was better that way. She'd married him for practical reasons, not romantic ones. Getting emotionally involved would only complicate things and make their eventual separation harder. But somewhere along the way the pretending had started to feel real. When Adrian smiled at her across a crowded room, her heart would skip a beat. When he placed his hand on her back to guide her through a doorway, she would feel heat spread through her entire body. When she watched him work late into the night, she would find herself admiring not just his dedication but the way his brow furrowed when he was concentrating, the way he ran his fingers through his hair when he was frustrated. She'd started falling in love with her fake husband, and that terrified her more than anything else in her life. Because Elena could see that Adrian was fighting the same battle. She'd caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unguarded and hungry. She'd noticed how his hands would clench when she got too close, like he was forcing himself not to reach for her. She'd heard the way his breathing would change when they had to touch for photos or public appearances. The worst part was the night she'd been sick with flu. Elena had been delirious with fever, calling out for someone to help her. Adrian had taken care of her with a gentleness that had surprised them both, bringing her medicine and cool cloths for her forehead. In her confused state, she'd pulled him down onto the bed with her, thinking he was someone else, someone who loved her. Elena's memories of that night were hazy, but she remembered the feeling of being held, of being wanted, of finally being touched by the man she'd been dreaming about for months. When she'd woken up the next morning alone, she'd convinced herself it had been a fever dream. Adrian had acted like nothing had happened, maintaining his usual polite distance. But now she knew it had been real. The pregnancy test proved it. Elena turned to look at Adrian's sleeping face in the moonlight coming through the windows. Even in sleep, he looked guarded, like he was protecting himself from something. She wondered what had made him so afraid of intimacy, so determined to keep people at arm's length. Tomorrow their contract would end. Tomorrow everything would change. And Elena still didn't know if the man lying next to her saw her as a person he could love, or just as something he could finally claim now that their business arrangement was over. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that in a few hours she would finally have her answers. The next morning, Elena woke up to the smell of coffee and something that had never happened before in their 12 months of marriage. Adrian was still in the apartment when she got up. She found him in the kitchen, standing at the counter with his back to her, wearing dark jeans and a white button-down shirt instead of his usual business suit. The sight of him in casual clothes made her stomach flutter in a way that she tried to ignore. "You're not at the office," she said, her voice still rough from sleep. Adrian turned around, and Elena was struck by how different he looked. His hair was less perfectly styled, falling slightly over his forehead, and there was something in his expression that she'd never seen before. Something almost vulnerable. "I took the day off," he said, handing her a cup of coffee prepared exactly the way she liked it. "I thought we should spend our anniversary together." Elena accepted the coffee, trying not to think about how he'd remembered that she liked it with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. "Our fake anniversary. Is it fake?" Adrian asked quietly, and the question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Elena didn't know how to answer that. Their marriage certificate was real. The feelings she'd developed for him were definitely real. But the foundation of their relationship was built on a business contract, not love. "I don't know," she admitted. Adrian nodded, like her honesty was exactly what he'd been hoping for. "Neither do I. That's what I want to figure out today." He'd planned a day for them to spend together away from the carefully constructed routines that had governed their married life. First, they went to a small art gallery in the part of town where Elena used to live before she'd married him. It was the kind of place she'd always dreamed of showing her work, intimate and authentic in a way that the fancy galleries in Adrian's world weren't. "I've been coming here for months," Adrian said as they walked through the exhibits. "The owner, Mrs. Chen, she tells me about all the artists. I've been learning about art because I wanted to understand what you love about it." Elena stopped walking and stared at him. "You've been coming here?" "When?" "Lunch breaks sometimes. After work. I wanted to understand your world better." Adrian paused in front of a painting that reminded Elena of her own style. You stopped painting after we got married. I've been wondering why. The question hit Elena like a punch to the chest. She had stopped painting, but she'd never admitted it to herself. She'd been so busy playing the role of Adrian's wife that she'd lost touch with the part of herself that was an artist. I don't know, she said. I guess I got distracted. By what? Elena looked at him, at the way he was watching her with complete attention, like her answer was the most important thing in the world. By you, she said before she could stop herself. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a crack in the careful control he always maintained. Elena, he said, her name rough in his voice. But before he could say anything else, Elena turned away and continued walking through the gallery. She wasn't ready to have this conversation yet, not when she still didn't understand what was happening between them. They spent the afternoon at a small cafe that Elena had mentioned loving months ago, one that Adrian had apparently remembered even though she'd only mentioned it in passing. They talked about things they'd never discussed before, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Elena learned that Adrian had taken over his father's company when he was only 25, after his parents died in a car accident. He'd been fighting to prove himself ever since, trying to live up to a legacy that felt impossibly large. Everyone expects me to fail, Adrian said, staring down at his coffee. The board, the investors, my competitors. They all think I'm too young, too reckless, too emotional to run cross industries. Is that why you needed a wife? Elena asked. To prove you're stable? Partly, Adrian admitted. But it wasn't just about the company. I was tired of being alone. I wanted someone in my life, but I didn't trust myself to do it the normal way. What do you mean? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. I've never been good at relationships. I work too much, I have trust issues, I don't know how to let people close without hurting them. A business arrangement seems safer for both of us. Elena felt something break open in her chest. Safer for me? You think I needed protection from you? I think you deserved better than what I was capable of giving you, Adrian said quietly. What if I wanted to decide that for myself? Adrian looked up at her then, and Elena saw raw vulnerability in his dark eyes. What if you decided I wasn't worth the risk? Elena reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. It was the first time she'd initiated contact between them, and she felt him tense under her touch before his fingers closed around hers. What if I decided you were? She said. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the small table, while something shifted between them. Elena could feel walls crumbling, barriers that they'd both built to protect themselves from exactly this kind of connection. When they got back to the penthouse that evening, the atmosphere between them had changed completely. The polite distance was gone, replaced by an electric tension that made Elena hyper-aware of every movement Adrian made, every glance he sent her way. They made dinner together, something they'd never done before. Adrian turned out to be surprisingly good in the kitchen, and Elena found herself laughing as he told her stories about his disaster attempts at cooking during his college years. I lived on takeout and whatever my housekeeper left in the freezer, Adrian said, expertly flipping the pasta in the pan. I probably would have starved to death if Mrs. Rodriguez hadn't taken pity on me. She still works for you, doesn't she? Elena asked. She'd met the older woman a few times and had always been touched by how protective she was of Adrian. She does. She was the one who told me I needed to stop living like a monk and find someone to share my life with. Elena paused in her chopping of vegetables. Is that what she said? Her exact words were, "You're going to die alone and bitter if you don't stop pushing everyone away," Adrian said with a smile. She's never been one to sugarcoat things. Smart woman. She likes you, Adrian said, glancing over at Elena. She told me I'd be an idiot to let you go when the contract ends. Elena's heart skipped a beat. What did you tell her? That I was already an idiot for waiting this long. They ate dinner by candlelight, not because it was romantic but because Elena had always liked eating by candlelight and Adrian had remembered. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing as easily as if they'd been together for years instead of just pretending to be. But as the evening wore on, Elena became increasingly aware that they still hadn't talked about the most important thing. The contract. What happened next? Whether they had a future together or if this was just one perfect day before they went their separate ways. When they were cleaning up the dishes, Adrian suddenly stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. Elena, he said, and something in his voice made her heart start racing. There's something I need to tell you about the contract. Elena set down the plate she'd been drying and looked at him. What about it? There are clauses in it that you never understood. Clauses that my lawyer insisted on including. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, messing up the style that had started the day perfect and had slowly become more disheveled as the hours passed. I should have explained them to you a year ago. Elena felt cold dread settle in her stomach. What kind of clauses? The kind that mean our marriage doesn't automatically end today unless we both agree to it, Adrian said quietly. The kind that give me certain rights as your husband once the initial terms are fulfilled. Elena stared at him, her mind racing. Rights? What kind of rights? The right to claim you as my wife in every sense, Adrian said, his voice rough. The right to a real marriage with real intimacy if I choose to exercise it. Elena felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. You mean I don't get a choice? You always have a choice, Adrian said quickly. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The contract gives me the right to claim you, but it doesn't force you to accept it. You can walk away right now, tonight, and I'll honor the original terms. You'll get everything I promised you, and you'll be free to live your life however you want. Elena's mind was spinning. But if I stay? If you stay, it means you want to try to make this marriage real. It means you're willing to let me love you the way I've been dying to love you for the past year. Elena felt tears burning her eyes. You've been dying to love me? Adrian took a step closer to her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Elena, I've been in love with you since the 3rd month of our marriage. Maybe earlier. I've been fighting it every day because I didn't want to trap you in something you didn't choose. But I did choose it, Elena whispered. I married you. You married me for money, Adrian said. I want you to choose me for love. Elena looked up into his dark eyes and saw everything she'd been hoping to find there for months. Love, longing, vulnerability, and a desperate hope that she wouldn't walk away. What if I choose you? She asked. Then I spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it, Adrian said, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. Then I finally get to touch you the way I've been dreaming about. Then I get to show you how much you mean to me. Elena leaned into his touch, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Show me, she whispered. And for the first time in their year of marriage, Adrian cross-kissed his wife like he meant it. Elena's world had just started to make sense when Victoria Sterling walked back into Adrian's life like a hurricane in designer heels. Elena had been in Adrian's office, bringing him lunch and stealing kisses between his meetings, when his secretary announced that Miss Sterling was here to see him. The way Adrian's face went completely blank told Elena everything she needed to know about who Victoria Sterling was, even before the woman herself appeared in the doorway. Victoria was everything Elena wasn't: tall, pale, blonde, and carrying herself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money or power. She wore a red dress that probably cost more than Elena used to make in a month, and when she smiled, it was the kind of smile that had sharp edges. Hello, Adrian, Victoria said, walking into the office like she owned it. You look good. Marriage agrees with you. Elena felt Adrian tense beside her, but his voice remained perfectly controlled when he spoke. Victoria, I didn't know you were back in town. I just flew in from London. I have some business to discuss with you. Victoria's eyes finally landed on Elena, and her smile became even sharper. You must be the wife. I've heard so much about you. Elena extended her hand, trying to match Victoria's confident energy. Elena Cross. Nice to meet you. Victoria Sterling, the blonde woman said, shaking Elena's hand with a grip that was just a little too firm. Adrian's former fiancé. The words hit Elena like a slap. She looked at Adrian, who was staring at Victoria with an expression she'd never seen before, part anger, part something that looked almost like fear. Elena, could you give us a few minutes? Adrian said quietly. This is business. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers about why Adrian had never mentioned being engaged before. But something in his expression stopped her. She nodded and left the office, but not before she caught Victoria's satisfied smile. Elena tried to focus on her own work for the rest of the afternoon, but she couldn't stop thinking about the way Victoria had looked at Adrian, or the way Adrian had looked at Victoria. There was history there, complicated and painful, and Elena realized she didn't know nearly as much about her husband's past as she'd thought. When Adrian came home that evening, he was different. The openness that had been growing between them over the past few weeks was gone, replaced by the same careful distance he'd maintained during their first months of marriage. Who is she? Elena asked without preamble when Adrian walked into their bedroom. Adrian loosened his tie, not meeting her eyes. Someone I used to know. Your former fiancé, she said. You never mentioned being engaged. Because it doesn't matter anymore, Adrian said, but Elena could hear the tension in his voice. It matters to me, Elena said. I'm your wife, Adrian. Don't I have a right to know about the woman who was almost your wife before me? Adrian sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking exhausted. Victoria and I were engaged 3 years ago. It was an arrangement between our families, a merger of two companies disguised as a love story. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. An arrangement? Like ours? No, Adrian said quickly, finally looking at her. Not like ours. What Victoria and I had was purely business. There were no feelings involved, at least not on my side. But there were on hers? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Victoria is used to getting what she wants. When I broke off our engagement, she didn't take it well. Why did you break it off? Because I realized I didn't want to spend my life with someone who saw me as a business opportunity instead of a person, Adrian said. Because I wanted something real, even if I didn't know how to find it. Elena walked over and sat down next to him on the bed. Is that why you married me? Because you wanted something real? Adrian turned to look at her, and Elena saw vulnerability in his dark eyes. I married you because I was tired of being alone, and because you were the first person in years who looked at me like I was just a man instead of a bank account. I didn't expect to fall in love with you. Elena felt her heart skip a beat. You love me? I love you, Adrian said, reaching out to cup her face in his hands. That's what scares me about Victoria being back. She has a way of destroying everything good in my life. Elena leaned into his touch. She can't destroy this unless we let her. But even as she said the words, Elena felt a prickle of unease. Victoria Sterling hadn't looked like a woman who was ready to accept defeat, and Elena had a feeling that their confrontation in Adrian's office was just the beginning. The next few days proved Elena's instincts right. Victoria seemed to be everywhere. At the charity luncheon Elena attended with Adrian's stepmother, at the gallery opening where Elena was showing some of her paintings, even at the coffee shop where Elena liked to work on her art. At first, Victoria's approach was subtle. She would make casual comments about Adrian's preferences, his habits, his past relationships. She knew things about him that Elena didn't, intimate details about his life before their marriage. Adrian always gets cranky when he's stressed, Victoria said at the charity luncheon, her voice carrying just far enough for Elena to hear. I used to give him back rubs to help him relax. He has this spot right between his shoulder blades that always gets tight. Elena tried not to react, but she felt heat rise in her cheeks. She and Adrian were still learning how to be physically intimate with each other, still discovering what he liked and didn't like. The idea that Victoria knew his body better than she did made Elena's stomach twist with jealousy. The worst part was that Victoria's comments had just enough truth in them to make Elena doubt herself. Adrian had been stressed lately, working long hours on a major deal. Elena had noticed the tension in his shoulders, but she'd been too shy to offer him a massage. What if he was comparing her to Victoria and finding her lacking? At the gallery opening, Victoria's tactics became more direct. She cornered Elena near the bar, her smile sharp and predatory. You know, I have to admit I'm impressed, Victoria said, sipping her champagne. You've managed to keep Adrian interested longer than I expected. Excuse me? Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. Oh, don't get me wrong. You're lovely in a naive sort of way. But Adrian has very specific tastes, and I'm not sure you're sophisticated enough to satisfy them long term. Elena felt anger flare in her chest. I think Adrian can decide for himself what satisfies him. Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Can he? Because from what I've heard, your marriage is still more of a business arrangement than a real relationship. Separate bedrooms, limited physical contact, a contract that's more like a merger than a wedding vow. Elena's blood ran cold. How did Victoria know about the details of their marriage contract? I don't know what you're talking about, Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. Don't you? Victoria leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Adrian told me all about it when we had lunch yesterday. He's been confiding in me about his marriage problems. Apparently, he's having second thoughts about claiming his wife in every sense of the word. Elena felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. You're lying. Am I? Ask him yourself. Ask him about our lunch, about the things he told me, about the offer I made him. Victoria's smile was triumphant. Ask him if he's ready to admit that he made a mistake marrying someone so far beneath his station. Elena turned and walked away before Victoria could say anything else, but the damage was done. Doubt had been planted in her mind, growing like a poison weed. Had Adrian really been having lunch with Victoria? Had he been discussing their marriage with his ex-fiancée? When Elena got home that night, she found Adrian in his study, working late as usual. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting up with the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. How was the gallery opening? Adrian asked, standing up to greet her. Elena hesitated, Victoria's words echoing in her mind. Did you have lunch with Victoria yesterday? Adrian's smile faded slightly. She mentioned that? Yes, we had a business meeting. She's trying to buy one of my subsidiary companies. A business meeting, Elena repeated, studying his face for any sign of deception. Elena, what's wrong? You look upset. Elena wanted to tell him about Victoria's comments, about the doubt that was eating away at her confidence. But what if Victoria was right? What if Adrian was having second thoughts about their marriage? Nothing, Elena said finally. I'm just tired. But Adrian could read her too well now. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. Talk to me, he said softly. What did Victoria say to you? How do you know she said something? Because I know Victoria and I know that look on your face. She's trying to get between us, isn't she? Elena pulled back to look at him. Is she succeeding? No, Adrian said immediately, his voice fierce. Elena, whatever she told you, whatever poison she tried to plant in your mind, it's not true. You're my wife. You're the woman I love. Victoria is nothing to me anymore. She knows things about you that I don't, Elena said quietly. Intimate things. She knows your body, your preferences, your history. Adrian cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. She knows the man I used to be. You know the man I am now, the man I want to be. That's worth more than all the history in the world. Elena wanted to believe him, but Victoria's words kept echoing in her mind. She said you told her about our marriage contract. About our problems. Adrian's jaw tightened. I didn't tell her anything personal about our marriage. Yes, she knows we had a contract, but that's public record. Anyone with the right connections could find out about it. She said you made a mistake marrying me. Elena, Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. Look at me. The only mistake I made was waiting so long to tell you how I feel. The only mistake I made was letting you doubt, even for a second, how much you mean to me. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, trying to chase away the doubt that Victoria had planted. Elena kissed him back, desperate to believe that what they had was strong enough to survive whatever Victoria was planning. But as they held each other in the quiet of Adrian's study, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria Sterling was just getting started. The next morning, Elena woke up to find Adrian already gone, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the newspaper folded next to her coffee cup, open to the society page. The headline made her blood run cold. Cross-industry CEO's marriage under scrutiny, business arrangement or true love? The article was full of unnamed sources and carefully crafted speculation, but the message was clear. Someone was leaking information about Elena and Adrian's marriage contract, suggesting that their relationship was nothing more than a business deal that had outlived its usefulness. Elena's hands shook as she read quotes from close friends of Adrian's, people who questioned whether he was ready to commit to a real marriage or if he would eventually return to someone more suitable, someone from his own social circle. The article didn't mention Victoria by name, but Elena knew exactly who was behind it. This was Victoria's next move in whatever game she was playing, and Elena was starting to realize that she was seriously outmatched. Her phone rang, and Elena saw Adrian's name on the screen. I saw the article, Adrian said without preamble. I'm handling it. How? Elena asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. I'm calling in some favors, putting pressure on the editor. This kind of speculation is exactly what Victoria wants. She's trying to make you doubt us, trying to make the public question our marriage. Is it working? Elena asked quietly. Not if I can help it, Adrian said fiercely. Elena, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Elena closed her eyes, thinking about Victoria's confident smile, about all the ways the other woman was superior to her. I'm trying. That's all I need, Adrian said. I'll be home early tonight. We'll figure this out together. But when Adrian came home that evening, he wasn't alone. Victoria was with him, looking perfectly composed and satisfied, like a cat who had just caught a particularly juicy mouse. Elena, darling, Victoria said as if they were old friends. I hope you don't mind me dropping by. Adrian and I have been having such interesting conversations about business lately. Elena looked at Adrian, trying to read his expression. He looked frustrated and angry, but there was something else there too, something that looked almost like defeat. What's going on? Elena asked. Victoria has made an offer for Cross Industries, Adrian said quietly. A hostile takeover bid that could destroy everything my father built. Victoria's smile widened. Unless, of course, we can come to some other arrangement. I've always believed that business and personal relationships don't have to be mutually exclusive. Elena felt ice form in her veins. What kind of arrangement? The kind where Adrian remembers what he walked away from 3 years ago, Victoria said. The kind where he stops playing house with his contract wife and comes back to the real world. Elena looked at Adrian, waiting for him to tell Victoria exactly where she could put her offer. But instead, he ran a hand through his hair and looked like a man being torn in two. Elena, he said quietly. We need to talk. Elena felt like she was drowning in plain sight, standing in her own living room while Victoria Sterling looked at her with triumph glittering in her cold blue eyes. Adrian hadn't said anything else after his quiet request to talk, but the silence was loud enough to shatter Elena's heart into 1,000 pieces. I think I should leave you two to discuss this, Victoria said sweetly, picking up her designer purse. Adrian, you have my number. Call me when you've made your decision. She paused next to Elena on her way out, leaning close enough that only Elena could hear her whispered words. He's already made his choice, sweetheart. He just hasn't found the courage to tell you yet. The door closed behind Victoria with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden quiet of the penthouse. Elena stood frozen, staring at Adrian, waiting for him to say something that would make this nightmare make sense. Elena, Adrian said finally, his voice rough with exhaustion. Sit down. Please. I don't want to sit down, Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady considering her world was crumbling around her. I want you to tell me what's happening. I want you to tell me that you're not actually considering whatever sick deal Victoria is offering you. Adrian's jaw tightened. It's not that simple. Yes, it is, Elena said, anger finally breaking through the shock. It's exactly that simple. Either you choose your wife or you choose your ex-fiancé. Either you fight for what we have, or you give up because it's hard. You don't understand the position she's put me in, Adrian said, frustration bleeding into his voice. Victoria has enough backing to destroy Cross Industries. She has shareholders, board members, financial institutions all lined up to support her takeover bid. If I don't find a way to stop her, I'll lose everything my father built. So you're going to sacrifice our marriage to save your company? I'm trying to find a way to save both, Adrian said. Elena stared at him, feeling like she was seeing him clearly for the first time in months. There is no way to save both, Adrian. Victoria made that very clear. She wants you to choose between your business and your wife, and you're actually considering it. That's not fair, Adrian said. Fair? Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? I gave up everything for you. I gave up my independence, my identity, my sense of self-worth. I became Mrs. Adrian Cross and lost Elena Martinez in the process. And now you want me to understand why you might throw all of that away because your ex-fiancé is threatening your precious company? It's not just about the company, Adrian said, his voice rising. It's about protecting you. Do you think Victoria will just disappear if I choose you over the business deal? She'll destroy you along with everything else. She'll make sure you never work as an artist again, that your reputation is so damaged you can't show your face in public. Let her try, Elena said fiercely. I survived being poor, Adrian. I survived my father's illness and my mother's death and losing everything I worked for. I can survive Victoria Sterling. But I can't survive watching her destroy you, Adrian said quietly. I can't survive knowing that loving me cost you everything. Elena felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The only thing that will cost me everything is you walking away. Everything else I can rebuild. But if you choose Victoria over me, if you give up on us because it's easier than fighting for what we have, then I'll never forgive you. And more importantly, you'll never forgive yourself. Adrian looked like she'd slapped him. Elena, that's not what I'm doing. Isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're looking for an excuse to run away. Just like you've been running away from real intimacy your whole life. That's not true. Then prove it, Elena said. Fight for me. Fight for us. Show Victoria that what we have is worth more than whatever she's offering. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, and Elena held her breath, waiting to see what he would choose. Then he turned away, walking to the window that overlooked the city. I need time to think, he said without looking at her. Elena felt something die inside her chest. Time to think about whether your wife is worth fighting for? Time to figure out how to protect you from the fallout of whatever decision I make. I don't need your protection, Adrian. I need your love. I need you to choose me, not because it's safe or smart or good for business, but because you can't imagine your life without me in it. Adrian's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. I'm trying to do what's best for everyone. No, Elena said quietly. You're trying to do what's easiest for you. You're trying to find a way to avoid having to risk everything for love just like you always have. Elena waited for him to argue, to defend himself, to fight back. But Adrian just stood there, staring out the window, and his silence told her everything she needed to know. I'm going to stay at my father's house tonight, Elena said. When you decide what you want, your company or your wife, you know where to find me. She packed a bag while Adrian stood frozen by the window. Part of her hoped he would stop her, would pull her into his arms and tell her that nothing was more important than their marriage. But he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even turn around when she walked to the door. Elena, he said just as her hand touched the doorknob. Elena's heart leaped with hope. Yes. I love you, Adrian said, his voice broken. Whatever happens, I need you to know that. Elena closed her eyes, feeling tears finally spill down her cheeks. Love isn't enough if you're not willing to fight for it. She left then, walking out of the penthouse and out of Adrian's life, not knowing if she would ever come back. Elena's father lived in a small house in the neighborhood where she'd grown up, a world away from Adrian's gleaming penthouse. When she showed up on his doorstep with red eyes and a suitcase, Roberto Martinez took one look at his daughter and pulled her into a fierce hug. What did he do? Her father asked, his voice gruff with concern. He didn't fight for me, Elena said, and finally let herself cry. Her father made her tea and listened while she told him everything, about Victoria, about the hostile takeover, about Adrian's impossible choice. Roberto had always been a man of few words, but when Elena finished her story, he had plenty to say. That boy is a fool, her father said bluntly. But he's not a bad man. He's scared. Scared of what? Of being happy. Of believing he deserves something good. Roberto studied his daughter's face. Some people, Mija, they've been hurt so much that they think love is just another thing that will be taken away from them. So they push it away first before it can hurt them. But I never gave him any reason to think I would leave him, Elena protested. No, but Victoria did. 3 years ago, she showed him that love could be a weapon, that people could use his feelings against him. Now she's doing it again, and he's reacting like that scared young man instead of the strong man he's become. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What am I supposed to do? I can't make him choose me. No, but you can show him what he's choosing to lose. You can remind him who he really is, not the man Victoria wants him to be. How? Roberto smiled at his daughter, the same smile that had gotten her through every crisis in her life. By being yourself, Mija. By being the woman who made him believe in love in the first place. Elena spent the next 3 days at her father's house, trying to figure out what she wanted to do next. Adrian called repeatedly, but she didn't answer. She wasn't ready to hear his voice, wasn't ready to find out if he'd chosen Victoria's deal over their marriage. Instead, she painted. For the first time in months, Elena picked up her brushes and let her emotions flow onto canvas. She painted her anger, her hurt, her love, her hope. She painted the man she'd fallen in love with and the marriage that had started as a business deal but had become the most real thing in her life. On the 4th day, Mrs. Rodriguez showed up at Roberto's door. That boy is making himself sick, Adrian's housekeeper said without preamble. He hasn't eaten, hasn't slept, just sits in his office staring at papers he's not reading. Then he should have thought of that before he chose his company over his wife, Elena said, but her words lacked conviction. He hasn't chosen anything, Mrs. Rodriguez said. He's paralyzed. That sterling woman has him convinced that any choice he makes will hurt you, so he's not making any choice at all. Elena felt a flicker of hope. What do you mean? I mean he turned down her business offer. Told her to go to hell actually, though he used more polite words. But he also hasn't called off her takeover bid, hasn't fought back, hasn't done anything to protect the company. Why not? Mrs. Rodriguez sat down across from Elena, her weathered hands folded in her lap. Because he thinks he doesn't deserve to have both the company and the woman he loves. He thinks he has to choose, so he's choosing to lose everything rather than risk making the wrong choice. Elena stared at the older woman, understanding flooding through her. Adrian wasn't choosing Victoria over her. He wasn't even choosing the company over her. He was choosing to sacrifice himself rather than risk hurting her, and in the process he was hurting them both. That stubborn, stupid, self-sacrificing man, Elena said. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. See. But he's your stubborn, stupid, self-sacrificing man. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Elena looked at the painting she'd been working on, a portrait of Adrian with his guard down, laughing at something she'd said, looking like the man he was when he forgot to be afraid. I'm going to remind him what he's fighting for, Elena said. Elena walked into Cross Industries like she owned the place, which technically as Adrian's wife she partly did. The security guards recognized her and waved her through, but she could see the surprise on their faces. Mrs. Adrian Cross hadn't been seen in the building since the newspaper article questioning her marriage had run a week ago. She took the elevator to the top floor, her heart pounding with each floor that passed. Elena had spent all morning getting ready for this confrontation, choosing her outfit carefully, a deep blue dress that Adrian had once said brought out her eyes, paired with the confidence she'd rediscovered during her days away from him. Adrian's assistant looked up in surprise when Elena walked past her desk without stopping. Mrs. Cross, Mr. Cross is in a meeting. Not anymore, Elena said, pushing open the doors to Adrian's office. Adrian was indeed in a meeting, sitting at his conference table with 3 men in expensive suits. But Elena only had eyes for her husband, who looked exactly like Mrs. Rodriguez had described, exhausted, hollow-eyed, and like he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. Gentlemen, Elena said pleasantly to the men at the table, I need a moment alone with my husband. The men looked at Adrian, who was staring at Elena like he couldn't believe she was real. He nodded slowly, and the men gathered their papers and left, closing the door behind them. For a moment, Elena and Adrian just looked at each other across the expanse of his office. Elena could see the longing in his dark eyes, the way his hands clenched on the table like he was fighting not to reach for her. You look terrible, Elena said. Adrian's mouth quirked up in the ghost of a smile. You look beautiful. I know, Elena said, walking closer to his desk. I also know that you've been torturing yourself for the past week, trying to figure out how to save everyone except yourself. Adrian stood up, running a hand through his hair. Elena, if you're here to tell me you're leaving me, I understand. I know I've handled this badly. I'm not here to leave you, Elena interrupted. I'm here to save you. From Victoria, from yourself, from whatever martyr complex you've developed. You can't save me from Victoria, Adrian said quietly. She has too much power, too many resources. She's going to destroy Cross Industries either way. Maybe. But she's not going to destroy us unless we let her. Elena walked around the desk until she was standing in front of Adrian. I've been thinking about something you said. About the contract having clauses I didn't understand. Adrian went very still. Elena. I want to understand them now. All of them. I want you to explain exactly what rights you have as my husband, and what rights I have as your wife. Why? Because I think there are things in that contract that Victoria doesn't know about. Things that might give us an advantage. Elena reached out and took Adrian's hands in hers. But mostly because I want to understand what I really agreed to when I married you. Adrian looked down at their joined hands, his thumb tracing over her wedding ring. You agreed to be my wife in name only. I changed the terms without asking you. How? Adrian walked over to his safe and pulled out a thick document. Their marriage contract. He set it on the desk between them and flipped to a section near the back. Here, he said, pointing to a paragraph of dense legal text. This clause states that after the initial 12-month period, the marriage becomes legally and contractually binding in all respects unless both parties agree to dissolution. Elena read the clause carefully. What does that mean in plain English? It means that our marriage doesn't automatically end after a year like you thought. It means that if I choose to claim my rights as your husband, real marital rights, including physical intimacy and shared assets, then you become my wife in every sense unless you actively choose to leave me. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. So you could have forced me to stay married to you? Legally, yes. But I would never do that. That's why I was trying to give you a choice. Adrian's voice was rough with emotion. That's why I was so afraid of Victoria's threats. I was terrified that you would think I was trying to trap you. Elena stared at the contract, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in her mind. Adrian, what other clauses are in here that I don't know about? Adrian flipped to another section. This one. It states that in the event of a hostile takeover attempt against Cross Industries, you have the right to vote your shares, which you acquired through marriage, in support of current management. Elena's eyes widened. I have shares in Cross Industries? 20%. They were transferred to you as part of the marriage settlement, but they're held in trust until the contract terms are fulfilled. Adrian looked up at her. Elena, with your 20% and my controlling 40%, we have enough shares to block Victoria's takeover attempt. Elena felt excitement building in her chest. But only if I choose to stay married to you and vote my shares in your favor. Yes. But I can't ask you to do that. I won't trap you in this marriage just to save my company. Elena looked at Adrian, at the man who had been torturing himself to protect her, who was willing to lose everything rather than ask her to sacrifice anything for him. She thought about Victoria's confident smile, about the way the other woman assumed that Elena would crumble under pressure. What if I want to be trapped? Elena asked softly. Adrian's head snapped up. What? What if I want to stay married to you, not because of a contract but because I love you? What if I want to use my shares to destroy Victoria's takeover attempt because she threatened my husband and my marriage? Adrian stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Elena, you don't understand what you're saying. If we fight Victoria together, she'll come after you with everything she has. She'll try to destroy your reputation, your career, your relationships. She'll make your life hell. Elena smiled, feeling more like herself than she had in weeks. Let her try. I'm not the naive girl who married you for money anymore, Adrian. I'm your wife. I'm a cross. And I don't run from fights. Elena. Besides, Elena said, picking up a pen from Adrian's desk, I have something Victoria doesn't. What's that? Elena signed her name on the signature line next to the clause about share voting rights, officially claiming her 20% stake in Cross Industries. I have you. The real you, not the scared boy Victoria knew 3 years ago. I have the man who builds companies and paints kitchens and makes coffee exactly the way I like it. Adrian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You're really going to fight her with me? I'm going to destroy her, Elena said matter-of-factly. No one threatens my husband and gets away with it. Adrian crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulling Elena into his arms and kissing her with all the desperation and love and relief of the past terrible week. I love you, he said against her lips. God, Elena, I love you so much. I'm sorry I was such an idiot. I'm sorry I didn't fight for you from the beginning. You're fighting now, Elena said, smiling up at him. That's all that matters. Adrian pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. Are you sure about this? Once we make this official, once we use these contract clauses against Victoria, there's no going back. We'll be married for real in every sense. Elena thought about the pregnancy test still hidden in her makeup bag at her father's house, about the secret she was carrying. Soon they would be a family in every sense. The thought filled her with joy instead of fear. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she said. Adrian kissed her again, deeper this time, like he was trying to make up for all the kisses they'd missed during their week apart. When they finally broke apart, Elena was breathless and dizzy with love. So, she said, straightening her dress and trying to look professional. What's our first move against Victoria? Adrian's smile was sharp and dangerous, the expression of a man who had just remembered that he was very, very good at winning. We're going to give her exactly what she wants. What do you mean? We're going to call a shareholders meeting. We're going to make her think she's about to get everything she's been fighting for. Adrian's eyes glittered with anticipation. And then we're going to pull the rug out from under her in the most public, humiliating way possible. Elena grinned. I like the way you think, Mr. Cross. I like the way you fight, Mrs. Cross. As they started planning Victoria's downfall together, Elena realized that this was what she'd been missing in their marriage. Not just love or physical intimacy but true partnership. They weren't just husband and wife anymore. They were a team, united against the world and unbreakable as long as they had each other. Victoria Sterling had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated Elena Martinez Cross. She was about to learn exactly how costly that mistake would be. The shareholders' meeting was set for Friday afternoon, giving Elena and Adrian exactly 5 days to prepare their counterattack against Victoria. What they hadn't expected was for Victoria to escalate her campaign of harassment in the meantime, turning their lives into a battlefield where no target was off-limits. It started on Tuesday morning when Elena arrived at her art gallery to find protesters outside, holding signs that read Cross Industries destroys local businesses, and fake marriage, real greed. The protesters were professional, too well organized and well funded to be genuine grassroots activists. Elena pushed through the crowd with her head held high, ignoring the cameras that followed her every move. Inside the gallery she found her assistant Maria in tears. Elena, I'm so sorry, Maria said. They've been here since 6 a.m. They're scaring away customers and the landlord called to say he's reconsidering our lease. Elena felt anger burn in her chest. Victoria wasn't just attacking Adrian's business anymore. She was attacking Elena's life, her work, her livelihood. It's not your fault, Maria. This is about my marriage, not the gallery. But even as Elena said the words, she knew that wasn't entirely true anymore. Victoria had made it clear that Elena was a target now, not just collateral damage. The harassment escalated throughout the week. Someone leaked Elena's personal information online, including her father's address and phone number. Roberto Martinez started receiving threatening phone calls in the middle of the night. Elena's art was criticized in a series of scathing reviews that appeared in influential magazines, all written by critics who had never seen her work before but suddenly had very strong opinions about her lack of technical skill and obvious commercial motivations. The worst attack came on Thursday evening, when Elena was leaving a charity board meeting that she attended as part of her duties as Adrian's wife. She was walking to her car when a group of photographers appeared, shouting questions about her marriage and taking photos from every angle. "Mrs. Cross, is it true that your marriage is just a business arrangement? Elena, how do you respond to allegations that you married Adrian Cross for his money? What do you say to people who claim you're not sophisticated enough to be the wife of a billionaire CEO?" Elena tried to ignore them, but the photographers pressed closer, their cameras flashing in her face. She felt trapped, surrounded, like prey being hunted by a pack of wolves. "Mrs. Cross, is it true that your husband is having an affair with his ex-fiancée?" That question stopped Elena cold. She turned to face the photographer who had asked it, her eyes blazing with fury. "My husband is the most honorable man I've ever known," she said clearly, her voice carrying over the chaos. "And anyone who suggests otherwise clearly doesn't know him at all." "But what about the photos of him having dinner with Victoria Sterling last night?" Elena's heart stopped. "What photos?" The photographer held up his camera, showing Elena a picture on the display screen. It showed Adrian and Victoria sitting across from each other at an intimate restaurant, leaning close together in conversation. Victoria's hand was on Adrian's arm, and from the angle of the photo, it looked like they were having a romantic dinner. Elena stared at the photo, her mind racing. Adrian hadn't mentioned having dinner with Victoria. He'd said he was working late last night, that he wouldn't be home until after Elena was asleep. "No comment," Elena said finally, pushing past the photographers to her car. But as she drove home, Elena couldn't get the image out of her mind. Why would Adrian have dinner with Victoria without telling her? Why would he lie about working late? By the time Elena got to the penthouse, she had worked herself into a state of barely controlled panic. She found Adrian in his study, exactly where he'd been every night this week, surrounded by papers and legal documents. "How was the board meeting?" Adrian asked, looking up with a tired smile. "Fine," Elena said, studying his face for any sign of deception. "How was work?" "Long. I was here until almost midnight reviewing contracts with the lawyers." Adrian set down his pen and really looked at her. "Elena, what's wrong? You look upset." Elena pulled out her phone and showed him the photo that the photographer had sent to her email. "Want to explain this?" Adrian's face went completely blank as he looked at the photo. "Where did you get this?" "From a photographer outside the charity meeting. He said it was taken last night while you were supposedly working late." Adrian stared at the photo for a long moment, then looked up at Elena with an expression she couldn't read. "Elena, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because it looks like you had a romantic dinner with your ex-fiancée while lying to me about where you were." "It wasn't romantic," Adrian said quickly. "Victoria called and said she had important information about the takeover. She said she would only meet in person, somewhere public. I thought it was safer to hear what she had to say." "Safer? Or did you want to see her?" Adrian stood up, frustration flashing in his eyes. "Elena, you know that's not true. You know how I feel about Victoria." "Do I?" "Because a few days ago you were seriously considering her business proposal. And now you're having secret dinners with her." "It wasn't secret. I just didn't want to worry you." Elena laughed bitterly. "Well, congratulations. Mission accomplished. I'm much more than worried now." Adrian crossed the room toward her, but Elena stepped back. "Elena, please. You have to trust me." "I want to trust you," Elena said, hating the way her voice shook. "But Victoria has been in my ear all week, telling me that you're going to leave me for her. And now I find out you're having private dinners with her while lying to me about it." "What did she tell you at dinner?" Elena asked. Adrian's jaw tightened. "She offered to call off the takeover if I agreed to divorce you and marry her instead." Elena felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her to go to hell," Adrian said immediately. "Elena, I would never." "But you didn't tell me about the offer. You didn't think I had a right to know that she was trying to break up our marriage?" Adrian ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to hurt you. I knew you were already stressed about the shareholders' meeting. So you decided to protect me by lying to me?" "I wasn't lying. I was trying to handle the situation without dragging you into Victoria's games." Elena stared at him, feeling like they were having the same argument they'd had a week ago. Adrian, we're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to face these things together. But you keep trying to protect me instead of trusting me to handle the truth. Because I love you, Adrian said desperately. Because I can't stand the thought of Victoria hurting you. She's already hurting me, Elena said quietly. She's been attacking my gallery, harassing my father, destroying my reputation. And instead of telling me that she offered you a way out of all of this, you kept it secret and made me find out from a photographer. Adrian looked stricken. Elena, I'm sorry. You're right. I should have told you. Yes, you should have. Just like you should have told me about all the other ways Victoria has been trying to manipulate you this week. What do you mean? Elena pulled out her phone again and showed him the series of text messages she'd received from an unknown number. Messages that contained photos of Adrian's office building, his car, his usual coffee shop. Messages that said things like, he's thinking about me, and, it's only a matter of time before he comes back to where he belongs. She's been stalking you, Elena said. And sending me photos to prove it. She's trying to make me think you're having an affair with her. Adrian's face went white with rage. Elena, why didn't you tell me about these? Because I wanted to see if you would tell me the truth about your dinner with her. I wanted to see if you trusted me enough to be honest. And I failed the test, Adrian said quietly. It wasn't a test, Adrian. It was me hoping that my husband would treat me like an equal partner instead of someone who needs to be protected from the truth. They stared at each other across the room, both of them breathing hard. Elena could see the regret in Adrian's eyes, but she could also see something else. The same fear that had made him consider Victoria's business proposal in the first place. She's winning, Elena said finally. Victoria is getting exactly what she wants. She's making us doubt each other, making us fight instead of working together. I know, Adrian said. Elena, I'm sorry. I know I've been handling this wrong. Elena walked over to him, close enough to touch but not quite touching. Then let's handle it right. No more secrets, no more protection, no more lies. We face Victoria together as partners or we lose everything. Adrian reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears that Elena didn't realize had fallen. Together, he said firmly. No more secrets. I promise. Elena leaned into his touch, feeling some of the tension leave her body. What did Victoria really want at dinner? The whole truth this time. Adrian took a deep breath. She wanted me to know that she has enough dirt on both of us to destroy our reputations completely. Photos of you before our marriage when you were struggling financially. Documentation of our contract. Evidence that our marriage started as a business arrangement. Elena felt cold dread settle in her stomach. What kind of photos? Pictures of you working multiple jobs, living in a tiny apartment, looking exhausted and desperate. She wants to paint you as a gold digger who trapped me into marriage. Adrian's voice was rough with anger. She also has recordings of conversations between us from the early days of our marriage, when we were still figuring out how to live together. How did she get recordings of our private conversations? I don't know. But she played me a clip of you telling me that you married me for the money, not for love. It was from our second week of marriage, when we were still being honest about the arrangement. Elena closed her eyes, remembering that conversation. They had been trying to establish boundaries, being brutally honest about their motivations for the marriage. She had said those words, but they had been taken completely out of context. She's going to release everything at the shareholders' meeting, isn't she? Elena said. Unless I agree to divorce you and merge my company with hers, Adrian confirmed. She'll destroy both of us publicly, make it look like our entire relationship is a fraud. Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking through the implications. Adrian, what if our relationship being a fraud in the beginning doesn't matter anymore? What do you mean? Elena pulled back to look at him. I mean, what if we tell our story ourselves? What if we control the narrative instead of letting Victoria control it? Elena, if people find out that our marriage started as a contract, then they'll also find out that it became something real. They'll see two people who found love in an unexpected place. Elena's voice grew stronger as the idea took shape in her mind. Victoria thinks she can destroy us by revealing the truth about how we met. But what if the truth is actually our greatest weapon? Adrian stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You want to tell everyone that we married for business reasons? I want to tell everyone that we married for business reasons and fell in love for real reasons. I want to show them the difference between a relationship built on manipulation and control like what Victoria wants, and a relationship built on respect and genuine partnership like what we have. Elena walked over to Adrian's desk and picked up a legal pad, her mind racing with possibilities. Think about it, Adrian. Victoria's whole strategy depends on people being shocked that our marriage isn't a traditional love story. But what if we reframe it? What if we make it a story about two people who were brave enough to take a chance on each other, even under unusual circumstances? That's a huge risk, Adrian said slowly. If it backfires, we'll lose everything. If we don't take the risk, Victoria wins by default. Elena looked up at him. Besides, I'm tired of being ashamed of how we met. I'm tired of acting like there's something wrong with the fact that we chose each other for practical reasons before we chose each other for love. Adrian walked over to her, reading what she was writing over her shoulder. You want to hold a press conference? I want to hold a press conference before the shareholders' meeting. I want to tell our story on our terms, and then I want to watch Victoria try to destroy something that we've already admitted to. Elena smiled grimly. It's hard to use someone's secrets against them when they've already shared those secrets publicly. Elena, are you sure about this? Once we tell the world about our contract, there's no taking it back. People will always know that our marriage didn't start with love. Elena turned to face him fully. Adrian, our marriage might not have started with love, but it's built on love now. That's what matters. That's what people will see if we're brave enough to show them. Adrian studied her face for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing the risks and benefits. Finally he nodded. What do you need me to do? I need you to trust me, Elena said. And I need you to be prepared to tell the world exactly how you feel about your contract wife. Adrian smiled, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from him in days. That's easy. I love my contract wife more than anything in the world. I love her enough to risk everything to keep her. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest. Even if it means losing the company? Elena, I've learned something this week. Companies can be rebuilt. But a love like ours? That's once in a lifetime. Adrian pulled her into his arms. I'd rather lose everything else than lose you. Elena kissed him then, pouring all of her love and faith and determination into the kiss. When they broke apart, she felt stronger than she had in weeks. We're going to destroy her, Elena said with quiet confidence. Together, Adrian agreed. As they worked late into the night preparing for their press conference, Elena felt a familiar flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with nerves. She thought about the pregnancy test still hidden at her father's house, about the secret she was carrying. Soon she would tell Adrian about the baby. But first they had to secure their future together. They had to prove that their love was strong enough to withstand anything Victoria Sterling could throw at them. And Elena was determined that their child would grow up knowing that sometimes the best love stories started with the most practical decisions, and that real love was worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. The press conference was scheduled for Thursday morning, exactly 24 hours before the shareholders' meeting that would determine the fate of Cross Industries. Elena woke up feeling like she was about to jump out of an airplane without knowing if her parachute would open. She and Adrian had spent the past 2 days crafting their statement, working with a crisis management team to anticipate every possible question and hostile angle. But as Elena stood in front of the bathroom mirror, applying makeup with shaking hands, she wondered if they were making the biggest mistake of their lives. Second thoughts? Adrian asked, appearing in the doorway behind her. Elena met his eyes in the mirror. Terrified thoughts. But not second thoughts. Adrian walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. We don't have to do this. We could still fight Victoria privately, try to win the shareholders' vote without going public. And let her control the narrative? Let her destroy us on her timeline instead of ours? Elena shook her head. No. We do this our way or we don't do it at all. They drove to the press conference in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Elena's phone had been buzzing all morning with calls from reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the fact that the Cross family had called an emergency press conference. The speculation was already running wild on social media and financial news sites. The conference was being held at Cross Industries headquarters, in the large auditorium that was usually used for company presentations. When Elena and Adrian arrived, the room was already packed with reporters, cameras and curious onlookers. Elena spotted Victoria Sterling in the back of the room, wearing a satisfied smile that made Elena's blood boil. Victoria had clearly expected them to try something desperate, and she was here to watch it blow up in their faces. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming, Adrian said, stepping up to the podium with Elena beside him. My wife and I have called this press conference to address some rumors and speculation about our marriage that have been circulating in recent weeks. Elena felt her heart hammering as Adrian continued with their prepared opening statement. This was it, the moment they either saved their marriage and his company, or destroyed both in a spectacular public failure. 1 year ago, Elena Martinez and I entered into a marriage contract, Adrian said clearly, his voice carrying over the murmur of surprise that rippled through the audience. This marriage was initially a business arrangement, designed to provide stability for my company and financial security for Elena's family. The room erupted in shocked whispers and camera flashes. Elena could see reporters frantically taking notes and typing on their phones. She caught Victoria's eye across the room and saw that the other woman's satisfied smile had disappeared, replaced by confusion and concern. However, Elena said, stepping closer to the microphone, what began as a practical arrangement became something far more valuable. Over the course of our first year together, Adrian and I discovered that we had something many couples never find: genuine respect, deep friendship, and ultimately real love. Our marriage might have started with a contract, Adrian said, taking Elena's hand, but it's built on something much stronger now. It's built on the choice we make every day to choose each other, to support each other, and to face life's challenges as partners. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Mr. Cross, are you saying that your marriage is no longer governed by a contract? I'm saying that our marriage has evolved beyond any contract, Adrian replied. The woman standing next to me is not my business partner or my contractual obligation. She's my wife, my equal, and my choice. Another reporter called out, Mrs. Cross, how do we know this isn't just another business arrangement? How do we know you're not just saying this to help your husband's company? Elena had expected this question, but it still stung. She looked out at the sea of skeptical faces and made a decision that she and Adrian hadn't discussed. Because I'm willing to prove it, Elena said. Adrian, can I have the microphone for a moment? Adrian looked surprised but handed over the microphone. Elena took a deep breath and made the biggest leap of faith of her life. 6 months ago, I could have walked away from this marriage with everything I was promised in our original contract, Elena said. My debts were paid, my father's medical bills were covered, and I had enough money to restart my art career. If this was just about business, I would have left then. Elena paused, gathering her courage for what came next. 3 months ago, I realized I was in love with my husband. Not his money, not his status, not what he could do for me, but the man himself. And last week, when a hostile takeover threatened everything he'd worked for, I chose to use my shares in his company to support him, even though I could have sold those shares and walked away with millions. The room was completely silent now, hanging on Elena's every word. But the real proof, Elena said, her voice growing stronger, is what I'm about to tell you now, something that not even my husband knows yet. Adrian's eyes widened, and Elena could see panic starting to form in his expression. She squeezed his hand reassuringly. 2 weeks ago, I found out that I'm pregnant with Adrian's child, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence of the auditorium. I could have used that news to trap him in our marriage, to secure my future regardless of his feelings. Instead, I chose not to tell him because I wanted him to choose me for who I am, not because I'm carrying his heir. Elena turned to look at Adrian, whose face had gone completely white with shock. Adrian, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But I needed everyone in this room to understand that when I choose you, when I fight for our marriage, it's not because I need your money or your protection. It's because I love you, and because the life we're building together is worth fighting for. The auditorium erupted into chaos, with reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing. But Elena only had eyes for Adrian, who was staring at her like she'd just rewritten his entire understanding of the universe. You're pregnant, Adrian said, his voice barely audible over the noise. 12 weeks, Elena said, tears streaming down her cheeks. I've been waiting for the right time to tell you, but there is no right time. There's only now and the choice we make about what comes next. Adrian dropped the microphone and pulled Elena into his arms, kissing her with a desperation and joy that told everyone watching exactly how he felt about his wife and their unborn child. When they finally broke apart, the room had quieted slightly, but Elena could see that their story had completely changed the energy in the auditorium. The skeptical faces had been replaced by something else: curiosity, sympathy, and in some cases, genuine emotion. Mr. Cross, a reporter called out, how do you respond to your wife's announcement? Adrian picked up the microphone, his arm still wrapped around Elena's waist. I respond by saying that Elena Martinez Cross is the strongest, bravest, most incredible woman I've ever known. She just proved that our love is real by choosing to trust me with the truth, even when it was terrifying to do so. And the baby? Another reporter asked. Adrian's smile was radiant. The baby is a blessing that I never expected and don't deserve. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of both my wife and our child. What about the shareholders meeting tomorrow? A financial reporter asked. Will this news affect Cross Industries? Cross Industries will be stronger than ever, Adrian said confidently. Because it will be led by a man who understands what's truly important in life, and supported by a woman who has proven that love and business can coexist when they're built on the right foundation. Elena looked out at the crowd of reporters and saw Victoria Sterling pushing her way toward the exit, her face twisted with rage and defeat. Their gamble had worked. By controlling their own narrative, by being vulnerable and honest about their unconventional love story, they had taken away Victoria's power to hurt them. But more importantly, they had proven to themselves and to the world that their marriage was worth fighting for. As they fielded more questions from the press, Elena felt Adrian's hand rest protectively on her still flat stomach. They had won this battle, but they still had to face the shareholders meeting tomorrow. However, Elena was no longer afraid. They had faced the worst Victoria could throw at them and they had come out stronger. Whatever happened next, they would face it together as partners, as parents, and as people who had chosen love over fear. The breaking point had become their breakthrough, and Elena had never been more certain that she had married exactly the right man. The shareholders meeting felt like stepping into a gladiator arena, with Elena and Adrian facing off against Victoria Sterling in front of an audience of investors, board members and media representatives who had been drawn by the previous day's explosive press conference. Elena sat in the front row, her hand resting protectively over her stomach as she watched Adrian take his place at the head of the conference table. He looked every inch the powerful CEO in his perfectly tailored black suit, but Elena could see the slight tension in his shoulders that told her he was as nervous as she was. Victoria sat at the opposite end of the table, flanked by her team of lawyers and financial advisors. She had recovered from her shock at the press conference and was back to her usual composed, predatory self. But Elena noticed that Victoria's confidence seemed forced now, like she was playing a role rather than feeling genuinely in control. Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of the board began, we're here today to vote on the proposed merger between Cross Industries and Sterling Corporation, as well as to address recent developments regarding the stability of current management. Elena felt her heart rate spike as Victoria stood to present her case. This was it. The moment they would find out if their public confession had been enough to save Adrian's company. Esteemed board members and shareholders, Victoria began, her voice smooth and professional, I come before you today to offer Cross Industries a path to unprecedented growth and stability. A merger with Sterling Corporation would create one of the largest companies in our sector, with combined resources that could dominate the global market. Victoria clicked through a presentation that was impressive in its scope and ambition. Elena had to admit that, purely from a business standpoint, Victoria's proposal was compelling. She was offering shareholders immediate financial returns and long-term growth potential that would be difficult to match. However, Victoria continued, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge, I must address the elephant in the room. Recent revelations about Mr. Cross's personal life have raised serious questions about his judgment and priorities. A CEO who makes major life decisions based on business contracts rather than genuine emotion may not be the kind of leader this company needs for the future. Elena felt anger flare in her chest. Victoria was twisting their love story, trying to make Adrian's practical approach to marriage sound cold and calculating. Furthermore, Victoria said, the dramatic announcement made yesterday raises questions about whether Mr. Cross is prepared to give this company the attention it deserves, or whether he will be distracted by personal matters and family obligations. The implicit criticism of Elena's pregnancy made her see red. Victoria was essentially arguing that Adrian would be a less effective CEO because he was becoming a father. When Victoria finished her presentation, it was Adrian's turn to respond. He stood slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate, and Elena could feel the shift in energy in the room. Ms. Sterling makes some excellent points about growth and market opportunities, Adrian began, his voice calm and measured. But she fundamentally misunderstands what makes a company truly successful in the long term. Adrian clicked to his first slide, which showed Cross Industries' financial performance over the past 5 years. Under my leadership, this company has grown by 300%. We've expanded into new markets, developed innovative products, and maintained employee satisfaction rates that are among the highest in our industry. Elena watched the faces of the board members as Adrian continued his presentation. She could see them responding to his confidence and competence, remembering why they had supported him in the first place. Ms. Sterling suggests that my personal life makes me unfit to lead this company, Adrian said, his voice growing stronger. I would argue the opposite. A man who understands the value of commitment, partnership, and building something lasting is exactly the kind of leader a company needs. Adrian clicked to a new slide that showed Elena's photograph alongside images of her artwork. My wife is not a distraction from my work, she's an inspiration for it. She's shown me that the best partnerships are built on mutual respect, shared goals, and the willingness to fight for what you believe in. Elena felt tears prick her eyes as Adrian continued. Yesterday, Elena proved that our marriage is not a business arrangement disguised as love. It's love that grew out of a business arrangement. She showed the world that sometimes the most practical decision you can make is to choose someone who challenges you to be better than you thought possible. Adrian paused, looking directly at Elena. She also showed me that real love means being willing to risk everything, including your pride, to fight for the person you choose to build a life with. The room was completely silent as Adrian clicked to his final slide. This is not just about a business merger, Adrian said. This is about what kind of company Cross Industries wants to be. Do we want to be led by someone who sees relationships as weapons to be used against competitors? Or do we want to be led by someone who understands that the strongest businesses are built on the same principles as the strongest marriages: trust, commitment, and the willingness to work through challenges together? Adrian sat down, and Elena could feel the shift in the room's energy. Victoria's presentation had been impressive, but Adrian's had been compelling in a completely different way. He had made this about more than just numbers and market share. He had made it about values and vision. The board chairman called for questions, and Elena held her breath as various shareholders and board members grilled both Adrian and Victoria about their plans for the company. The questions were tough but fair, and Elena could see that Adrian was holding his own. Finally, it was time for the vote. All those in favor of the proposed merger with Sterling Corporation? The chairman asked. Elena watched as hands went up around the room. She counted quickly. It looked close but not overwhelming. All those opposed to the merger and in favor of maintaining current management? More hands went up, and Elena felt her heart leap with hope. It was close, but it looked like Adrian might have the votes he needed. We'll now count the proxy votes and shares held by remote shareholders, the chairman announced. This was the moment Elena had been waiting for. She stood up, her heart pounding, and walked to the front of the room. Excuse me, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the conference room. I believe I have something to add to the count. Victoria's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as Elena approached the podium. As a 20% shareholder in Cross Industries, I would like to officially cast my vote, Elena announced. She could hear murmurs of surprise rippling through the room. Many of the attendees hadn't realized that Elena held such a significant stake in the company. I vote against the merger with Sterling Corporation, Elena said clearly. And I vote in favor of maintaining Adrian Cross as CEO of Cross Industries. Elena looked directly at Victoria as she continued. Furthermore, I want to state for the record that my husband has never asked me to vote in favor of him. He has never used our personal relationship to pressure me into supporting his business decisions. My vote today is based purely on my assessment of what's best for this company and its shareholders. Elena paused, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. Adrian Cross is not just my husband. He's the most ethical, dedicated, and visionary leader I've ever known. He's someone who builds things to last, who treats people with respect, and who understands that real success comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. Elena turned to face the room full of shareholders. Victoria Sterling has spent the past weeks trying to destroy my marriage, attacking my reputation, and undermining my husband's work. That's not the kind of leadership this company needs. That's not the kind of person you want making decisions about your investments. Elena walked back to her seat, her heart racing but her head held high. She had said what needed to be said, and now it was up to the shareholders to decide. The final count took another 10 minutes, but when the chairman announced the results, Elena felt like she could breathe again for the first time in weeks. The motion to merge with Sterling Corporation is defeated, the chairman announced. Adrian Cross will remain as CEO of Cross Industries. The room erupted in applause, and Elena watched as Victoria's face went white with rage and disbelief. The other woman had been so confident that her superior resources and connections would carry the day, but she had underestimated the power of genuine leadership and authentic relationships. As the meeting broke up, Adrian made his way over to Elena, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around despite the crowd of people watching. We did it, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Elena, we actually did it. You did it, Elena corrected. You showed them who you really are. No, Adrian said, setting her down gently and cupping her face in his hands. We did it together. You saved me, Elena. You saved us. As they kissed, Elena heard Victoria's voice cutting through the celebration around them. "This isn't over," Victoria said coldly as she passed by with her team. "You may have won today, but you've made a powerful enemy." Adrian pulled back from Elena and looked at Victoria with an expression of calm confidence. "No, Victoria. It is over. You've lost and you need to accept that." "I don't lose," Victoria snapped. "You just did," Elena said quietly. "And you lost because you never understood what Adrian and I have. You thought our marriage was a weakness you could exploit, but it's actually our greatest strength." Victoria stared at them for a moment, her mask of composure finally slipping to reveal the bitter, angry woman underneath. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Elena watched her go, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Victoria had been so focused on winning that she had forgotten what she was fighting for in the first place. "Do you think she'll try again?" Elena asked Adrian. "Maybe," Adrian said. "But it doesn't matter. Whatever she throws at us, we'll handle it together. She can't destroy what we have because what we have is real." Elena leaned into her husband's embrace, feeling their baby flutter in her stomach as if celebrating their victory. They had faced the worst Victoria could do, and they had not only survived but thrived. Adrian Cross had finally claimed his wife, not as a possession or a prize, but as a partner and an equal. And Elena had claimed him right back, choosing love over fear and proving that sometimes the best love stories started with the most practical decisions. They were going to be just fine. 6 months later, Elena stood in the nursery of their penthouse, painting the final touches on a mural that covered one entire wall. The scene depicted a city skyline at sunset, with two figures standing hand in hand on a rooftop, looking out at the world together. It was their story, told in soft pastels and golden light. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. "The contractor said the crib will be delivered this afternoon," Adrian said from the doorway, watching her work with the same expression of wonder that crossed his face every time he caught her painting. Elena set down her brush and turned to smile at her husband. At 7 months pregnant, she was gloriously round and glowing, and Adrian treated her like she was made of spun glass and starlight. "Good," Elena said. "I want everything to be perfect before she arrives." "She?" Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Did Dr. Martinez tell you something at your appointment yesterday?" Elena grinned. "No, but I have a feeling. Call it mother's intuition." Adrian crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her swollen belly. "Boy or girl, this baby is going to be the luckiest kid in the world." "Because of the trust fund you've already set up?" Elena teased. "Because they'll have you as a mother," Adrian said seriously. "Because they'll grow up knowing that love is worth fighting for." Elena leaned back against her husband's chest, feeling completely content for the first time in her life. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of changes, but all of them had been good. Cross Industries was thriving under Adrian's leadership. The publicity from their unconventional love story had actually boosted the company's reputation, with several major clients citing Adrian's commitment to partnership and authentic leadership as reasons for choosing to work with them. Elena's art career had also taken off in ways she'd never imagined. Her gallery was booked solid for the next 2 years, and she'd been commissioned to create pieces for several high-profile collectors. The pregnancy announcement had somehow made her more relatable and interesting to the art world, proving that she was more than just the billionaire's wife. But the best change was in their relationship. The crisis with Victoria had forced them to communicate more honestly and deeply than many couples ever managed. They had learned to trust each other completely, to face problems as a team, and to choose love even when it was difficult. "I have something for you," Adrian said, pulling a small wrapped box from his pocket. Elena turned in his arms, eyebrows raised. "It's not my birthday. Or our anniversary. Or any holiday I can think of. It's the anniversary of something," Adrian said mysteriously. "Open it." Elena unwrapped the box to find a beautiful pendant necklace inside. The pendant was a small piece of original art, a tiny painting of a coffee cup next to a paintbrush, mounted in an elegant gold setting. "Adrian, it's beautiful," Elena breathed. "But what's the anniversary?" "It's been exactly 2 years since I first saw you at Tony's Coffee Corner," Adrian said. 2 years since I walked into that little cafe and saw you behind the counter, looking frustrated with the espresso machine and completely gorgeous without even trying." Elena looked up at him in surprise. "You remember the exact date?" "I remember everything about that day. How you had paint under your fingernails even though you were working at a coffee shop. How you smiled at every customer like they were the most important person in the world. How you made me want things I'd convinced myself I didn't need." Adrian took the necklace from the box and fastened it around Elena's neck, his fingers gentle at her nape. I fell in love with you that first day, Elena. I just didn't know it yet. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You never told me that. I was scared to admit it even to myself. I'd spent so long convinced that love was just another business transaction that I didn't recognize the real thing when it hit me. Adrian cupped her face in his hands. But you taught me the difference. You showed me what it means to choose someone every day, not because you have to but because you want to. I love you, Elena whispered. I love the man you were when I met you and I love the man you've become. I love our complicated beginning and our beautiful present and whatever crazy future we're going to build together. They kissed softly, the kind of kiss that spoke of comfort and commitment and deep, abiding love. When they broke apart, Elena felt their baby kick as if celebrating along with them. Speaking of our future, Adrian said, I have some news about Victoria. Elena tensed slightly. They hadn't heard from Victoria Sterling since the shareholders' meeting, but Elena knew the other woman well enough to know she wouldn't give up easily. What about her? She's getting married, Adrian said. To a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley. The announcement was in the financial papers this morning. Elena blinked in surprise. She's getting married? When? Next month apparently. It seems she decided that if she couldn't have cross industries, she'd find another empire to attach herself to. Elena felt a wave of something that might have been pity. Do you think she loves him? Adrian shrugged. I think Victoria loves the idea of winning. She loves power and status and the feeling of being in control. Whether she loves the man himself. He trailed off. I hope she does. I hope she finds what we have. Elena was struck by the generosity in Adrian's voice. 6 months ago, he would have been bitter about Victoria's attempts to destroy their marriage. Now, he could wish her happiness with genuine sincerity. You're a good man, Adrian Cross, Elena said. I'm a man who knows how lucky he is, Adrian corrected. I almost lost the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too scared to fight for it. I'm not making that mistake again. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message and she glanced at it to see a message from her father. Saw the art review in the Times. So proud of you, Mija. Your mother would be proud too. Elena showed the message to Adrian, who smiled. Roberto Martinez had become like a father to Adrian as well over the past few months, and the two men had bonded over their shared protectiveness of Elena and their excitement about becoming grandfather and father, respectively. He's right, you know, Adrian said. Your mother would be incredibly proud of the woman you've become. Elena felt the familiar pang of missing her mother, but it was softer now, tempered by gratitude for the family she'd found with Adrian. I think she would have liked you, Elena said. She always told me to find a man who saw me as an equal partner, not just a pretty decoration. Smart woman, Adrian said. I can see where you get your strength. They spent the rest of the afternoon finishing the nursery, hanging pictures and arranging furniture and generally marveling at how much their lives had changed in such a short time. As evening approached, they made dinner together in their kitchen, the same kitchen where they'd had their first real conversation about their feelings a year ago. Do you ever regret it? Elena asked as they cleaned up the dishes. The way we started? The contract and the business arrangement and all the complications. Adrian considered the question seriously. No, he said finally. I think we needed to start the way we did. If we'd met under normal circumstances, I probably would have been too scared to pursue you. I would have convinced myself that you were too good for me, too pure to get involved with someone as emotionally damaged as I was. And I probably would have been too intimidated by your wealth and status to give you a real chance, Elena admitted. I would have assumed you were just playing games. The contract forced us to spend time together without the pressure of trying to impress each other, Adrian said. It let us get to know each other as people before we had to figure out our feelings. Elena nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. It was like having a year-long first date where we couldn't leave early or pretend to be someone we weren't. Exactly. And by the time we realized we were falling in love, we already knew we could live together, work together, and respect each other. That's a better foundation than most couples ever get. As they settled onto the couch for the evening, Elena felt their baby kick again, stronger this time. Adrian immediately placed his hand on her belly, his face lighting up with the same joy and amazement he showed every time he felt his child move. 2 more months, he said softly. 2 more months until our family is complete, Elena agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the city through their floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena thought about everything they'd been through together, the careful distance of their early marriage, the growing attraction they'd tried to ignore, the crisis with Victoria that had nearly torn them apart, and the love that had ultimately conquered every obstacle. "Adrian," Elena said softly. "Thank you." "For what?" Elena turned to look at him, taking in his handsome face and kind eyes and the gentle way he touched her belly where their child was growing. "For being brave enough to propose a crazy business arrangement to a stranger in a coffee shop. For choosing me even when it was complicated. For fighting for us when I was too scared to believe we were worth fighting for." Adrian leaned over and kissed her forehead. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on an emotionally repressed workaholic who didn't know how to love someone until you taught him." "We taught each other," Elena corrected. "We did," Adrian agreed. "And we're going to keep teaching each other for the next 50 years. Elena smiled, imagining their future, raising their children, growing old together, facing whatever challenges life threw at them with the same partnership and determination that had gotten them through their first year of marriage. Their love story might have started with a business contract, but it had become something neither of them could have planned or predicted. It was real and messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. Elena Cross had married a stranger for money and ended up with the love of her life. Adrian Cross had hired a wife for business reasons and found his soulmate. And sometimes, the most practical decision you could make was to choose love, even when it came disguised as a business contract. As Elena drifted off to sleep that night in Adrian's arms, she thought about the title she would give their story if she ever painted it. 1 year of marriage without touching her. Until the billionaire claimed his wife back. But that title wasn't quite right anymore. Because Adrian hadn't claimed her back, they had claimed each other. They had chosen each other every single day, through every challenge and every joy, until their marriage became exactly what it was always meant to be. A love story worth fighting for.